Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. And you know our custom when we begin, we like for you to place your name, your district, anything you want on the chat. And today we are delighted to have not only one of African Methodist's prominent preachers, but one of Black America's prominent public officials. We are excited today to welcome Representative Reverend Dr. Harold Moses Love Jr. Had to put all that in there. Dr. Love, welcome to the Christian Recorder Dialogues.
Dr. Thomas, thank you for having me on. Very excited that we can finally have this conversation we've been talking about having for quite some time now.
Yes. The last time we had you, you were part of our panel on AME Black State Legislators. And since that time, we've actually elected at least two new ones who are actually both, I believe, one is a clergywoman in Arizona, Representative Quanta Cruz. Another one is a young man in Maryland. So we are adding to the AME number, which we are excited about. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. But Reverend Love, I've known you practically all my life, and it's been my privilege to see you grow from helping to lead our RAAC in the 13th District to now being the pastor of one of the top pulpits in not only the Tennessee Annual Conference, but I would dare say the 13th District, and to hold leadership for our community in the state and indeed nationally. So just an honor to have you here. And I'm too excited to talk to us and for the connection to get to know you a little bit better and what you're doing beyond the impeccably dressed man I think people remember you with the impeccably dressed man with the tennis shoes at General Conference. That's what
Right.
most people remember, but you've done a lot more than that, man. So, just to begin, first question I want to ask is, so you, above all else, are a clergy person. You're a preacher. So tell us about your relationship to the AME Church and how did you get called to the ordained ministry?
Well, thank you again for that question. Like so many of us who have been lifelong members of the AME Church, my first recollection of involvement really came from the local church, being involved with the Young People's Usher Board, being involved with the Young People's Department, being involved with the Young People's Choir. And at that point, certainly, of course, attending many of the meetings, the Sunday School Convention, the youth congresses. And then at a certain point, you age out of the YPD and you start to look for the avenues for you to serve God's kingdom. And for me, that came right after graduation from college. I was working for the state of Tennessee in the Division of Property Tax Relief and felt this calling to go into ministry. I'm still trying to figure out what the calling really meant and trying to figure out what all that entailed, and had several conversations with my home church pastor at Lee Chapel, but also a colleague of mine who was already in ministry, Reverend Stephen Lee, and gave me some guidance and tips on how to respond to what may be the call from the Lord. Accepted the call to ministry. Immediately then went through the procedure of the quarterly conference, preaching trial sermon, went through the district conference, and then into seminary at Emory University, then through the Board of Examiners through the annual conference, transferred from Emory to Vanderbilt University School of Divinity, and subsequently in 1998, finished my degree from Vanderbilt School of Divinity, got a master's degree in theological studies.
And I know that you had quite the career in the charges of the church. So walk us through your pastoral career.
Sure. So graduating in 1998, received my deacon's ordination and then my elder's ordination in 99. Then had the privilege of being not only ordained, but then sent out to my first pastoral charge, a place called Hopewell AME in Columbia, Tennessee in 1999. Stayed there to 2002, got then transferred to St. Paul AME Church in Nashville. Stayed there from 2002 to 2016. Around 2015, had the wonderful opportunity to be assigned as a presiding elder for 1 year while simultaneously pastoring St. Paul AME Church. Had a wonderful experience, got to see really the in and out of the church from that perspective. Then in November of 2016, got assigned to Lee Chapel AME Church, which is my home church, and then had a wonderful opportunity to start building ministry at that level. I would tell you it was a challenge initially because coming from St. Paul, which was about a 50-member church, to Lee Chapel, which at that time was around 280 members, was a difference, because you go from your smaller locations where you are doing a great deal of the work, whether you're working with the usher board or you're working with the choir to develop the worship experience, then coming to a larger congregation where you have larger staff when it pertains to stewardesses, stewards, trustees, missionary society, and even ministry staff, caused me to have to take a step back and allow some things to happen that I had been doing myself in those other churches.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's because I know ministry we've talked about this, how at that scale, like you said, you were used to having to do some stuff where it's like, no, you got people that can do it, and those people are used to doing things, so you have to be more of a orchestrator than having to do stuff yourself. So, and I know that's an adjustment for several people, who are the Gen Xers are now getting these larger churches, and we've seen some appointments across the connectional church, but people are like, oh shoot, I can do this, but I don't have to go change the light bulb. There literally are people who will do that for me in this church.
No, that's literally one of the challenges that one has, and you don't think about that when you get moved from, again, a 50-member church where you may have 6 stewards, you may have 2 trustees, 3 trustees, you may have 4 or 5 men in the church. You go to a larger situation where you have 50 or 60. It's an adjustment because, again, you're used to doing so much. Not that the smaller churches aren't involved, but it's more of a collaborative effort because they need you to do certain things. And even to the sense of being the key holder, right? That you are the first responder when the alarm goes off at a smaller situation. You are the one who is there to open the doors to the church. Then you get to a larger church, and you do have people who will say, look, Reverend, we will help you. It's our church also. We're engaged in ministry, and allow us to help you in the capacity. It just takes a little bit of an adjustment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But, and again, I think it's important to note that you always knew when you were called to the ordained ministry that you were called to pastor. And I think that's something we can't understate, because you've been on the board of examiners, and and you've had sons and daughters in the ministry. So it's being called a pastor and being called to the ordained ministry are 2 different things.
Well, I'll say this, that when I initially accepted my call to ministry, I did not envision pastoring a church.
Interesting.
I had it all laid out. I was going to go to law school. I was going to get my MDiv. I was going to return to Lee Chapel. I was going to be on staff at Lee Chapel. I was going to offer my legal services to the conference. I had this all planned out. I was then going to run for office. I mean, it was all, worked as we do oftentimes with our plans before God. And it was in the interim of my last year in seminary. I was going through this difficult time of trying to figure out the nuances of, even though I was on the itinerant track, was pastoral ministry the direction I was going to go in. I never shall forget, had a very interesting conversation with then General Officer Hill, who was over Christian education, about the Richard Allen Young Adult Council and about getting involved in the church and even pastoral ministry. And I credit him with helping me, along with Reverend Edward Lee Thompson, who was my father in the ministry at Lee Chapel at the time, on helping guide me into the prospect of that. Because it can be a scary notion, right? That you've been ordained as a deacon. The next year, you are going to be ordained as an elder, and you have so many people saying, listen, you may get a church next year. You think, well, I didn't sign up to get a church. And then you must go into deep prayer and listen for God's voice. And that's what I did. And it was because of those mentors and also classmates of mine who would have conversation with me about what do you think the Lord is pulling you into, that allowed me to be able to say in 1999, before the ordination process occurred for elders orders, to say, I'm willing to go. Because there was also a part of me that said, with my seminary training, perhaps I can go to a church and provide for them what I learned at Vanderbilt and the deep understanding of God's word and biblical research, take that to a congregation.
I never knew that you had, I mean, again, just the fact that you had to figure out what calling and ministry you wanted to do, I think is important, because everyone has to make that, I don't want to say a double choice, but
Sure.
you have to first and know that you're called to ordain ministry
Yeah.
and know what God has ordained you to. And we know, and we talked about this again, one of the issues in our church right now is not everyone is called to pastoral ministry,
Sure.
but within our governance structure, we only recognize you're either in ordained ministry,
Sure.
you're either in pastoral ministry or you're a chaplain. And that in between, we don't really have a space for that formally. But on the flip side, we have a personnel crunch. So it's a lot going on. But
No, I was still trying to figure it out. I mean, even up until ordination year, because keep in mind, I still had the political bug that was biting me. So I was still trying to figure out how to run for office. I had run in 98 and lost that election. And so my mind was on, do I run for office, knowing that I might get sent to a church outside of Nashville? And what does that look like for me to do that? So it was a lot of working out, your situation and trying to figure out what God is calling you to, that is important. That's why it's important to have conversations with persons in the Board of Examiners, persons who have left the Board of Examiners and are now pastoring, persons who, to your point, may be in other forms of ministry, youth ministry, music ministry, prison ministry, or incarcerated persons ministry, all those various types, chaplaincy, all those things, I was trying to weigh out. Even at one time, did look at the chaplaincy and trying to figure out, what was the path.
And that's a good segue into the next question. You kind of teased it a little bit. So you decided to run for elected office. And I know that one of our persons that we work with a lot, Ms. Reverend Lakeisha Womack, helped you in one of your runs, but she was a student at Vanderbilt, so we just want to give her a shout out. But tell us about how you decided to run for elected office. How were you called to that particular role? And some would also argue elected office is a ministry as well.
Sure. So my father, Harold Love Sr., was a state representative from 1968 to 1994. And of course, going to his office with him on a daily basis in middle school and of course in high school, and watching him do government well, as I say it, opened up my eyes about the potential of seeking elected office. And while in college, interned in his office and got to see a deeper side of the work that he did. And so for me, the calling into public service was one that lined up with what values my family had instilled in myself and my sisters. And just thought that there may be a natural transition for me to go into public office. My father and I had a conversation, and we both thought it was best that I did not run while he was leaving office. Did not want to be a situation where it seemed as if there was a handoff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I applaud those who are able to do that. But my father's advice to me was to go work, get some life experience, because I need to pull back on the life experience when I got into office if I was to be elected. So ran for state representative in 1998, lost that race. And to your point, Reverend Lakeisha Womack was a campaign manager for me in my early bids, ran again in 2000, lost that election, and learned a lot from those two losses. Then began to ask the question, is this for me? Is this what the Lord wants me to go into? Never shall forget, I had a conversation with one of our presiding elders, Elder Scruggs, who said, I see you running for office. I see you trying to get into politics. He said, you're trying to do politics and trying to do the church. Maybe you should just focus on one right now and then see what happens later on. He said, I would suggest you focus on your ministry right now. And so I did that. I focused on my ministry, but still could not shake the political bug. And had a colleague of mine in another denomination said to me, he said, what I would advise you do is this: do what you propose to do in the office outside the office. And by that, he meant if you want to improve the quality of education or the academic attainment of students, why don't you engage in after-school tutoring programs and maybe even substitute teaching, because that gives you a chance to pour into the students. If you want to engage in making our community safer, why don't you get involved with the Neighborhood Watch and efforts to reduce crime in the neighborhoods? If you want to get involved in trying to help juveniles take the right path, get involved with some boards or some organizations. And I did that. and found myself being appointed to the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, which opened my eyes about some of the things that young people had to really endure in situations where the home environment wasn't really where it should be. And that provided for me a springboard. I didn't realize it, but a springboard for the third time I ran for office, to be a bit more equipped in answering policy questions. Of course, lost that race, which really began to make me question, is this where the Lord wants me to be? And then eventually I got a chance to really display what I would say some of my skills in organization leadership when the floods hit Nashville in
Yep.
2010. And I was pastoring St. Paul AME Church. Got a chance to be one of the anchor churches and leading efforts in the community to revitalize the community after the flood, but also provide help to those who were suffering from being unhoused and having issues with government red tape. In that capacity, allowed me to really display leadership skills. And I had some folks came to me and said, listen, we saw how you led the community in the flood. We saw how you provided resilient services. The next time you run for office, we're going to be behind you. And so that led to finally 2012, a victory in the state house election, won by 58 votes. And it gave me a chance to then finally realize a dream that I had longed for so long. But I will say this from a spiritual perspective. In 2010, when folks approached me about it, I said to the Lord, I don't want to run for office anymore. I'm satisfied with the level of service I've given to the community. I'm going to focus more on my spiritual development and pastoral ministry. And the Lord said to me in the same voice he said when he called me into ministry, he said, now that all of you is out of it, now you have the victory.
Wow. From the spectator side, because I have the privilege of walking with you, seeing some of this, and walking with you through some of this. I still have my Love in the House T-shirt is a little bit too small now, but I remember
you still have these pins, keep love in the house.
Yeah, I remember you had the Keep Love in the House pin, and just like as a kid, I always remember, I remember your father's legacy, and of course your mother's work for years, the whole family's work. So you all were the family was legendary in Black Tennessee politics, quite frankly. Sure. And I remember those runs, and I remember the time that you made it to the runoff, and then 14 votes, 14 votes, and we were like, who are the 14 people? Right. And I also was blessed to be in that room when we were refreshing that button and saw the final ballots come in. And I remember talking with you when you had finally said, you know what, John, it was after run number 3. It went that 22 space. We said, look, I did what I could. The flood, and after that flood, and really, like I echo what you just said. Your ministry after the flood really shifted, and the community saw you for who you were. And I think that best advice that friend gave you, do what you're going to do out of office as if you were in the office.
That's right.
And I think so many times, even the Christian recorder, though this is a church job, it still is an elected position of the church. And I was privileged to be able to do things. Dr. Sidnor allowed me to do some of the work to understand this role as if I was. So I wrote for the recorder for years. Even before I thought about approaching Dr. Sidnor about wanting to run, I wrote for the recorder. I did what I would want to do if I had the seat. And I think that's one lesson that I hope that people are hearing. Our best persons, whether they be running for bishop or general office or elected office in your community, do the job that you would want to have as if you already had it. Yeah. And I think sometimes, and especially, and I'm just saying this in general, we need to be careful about looking at people. It's good to have ambition. And we know that you wanted and you knew that this is something that you wanted to do because you sat at your father's feet. But it wasn't enough to sit at your father's feet. You had a hunger for it. And when the community saw that you were passionate about this, beyond being Harold Moses Love Sr.'s namesake, that really took off. And I saw the community embrace you. I saw people, pick up that banner, and you did a great job and have done a great job. So I just hope that those who are listening have heard that and caught that. So, kudos to you for being obedient
Sure.
to the Spirit and for, understanding that piece, like, if I do the work, that will come. And again, that spoke to me when you say, when God told you, now that you are out of it, I will put you there. That's you preach something. You preach something.
And I'll tell you, Dr. Thomas, let me say thank you, because you have been there in every step of the journey, not just with words of encouragement, but also financial support. But I'll tell you, for those who may not understand the dynamics, my father was larger than life in Nashville because of the office he held, and the opportunity to pick up his work, right, was not done from a selfish perspective, but just one, as you said, a young man seeing his father do the work and wanting to continue it. But at my own time, I was not as ready as I thought I was. And I liken it to the Moses situation with him trying to free his people. He had a good intention, but the Lord was like, I got to do this way through you, because you're going to need more than just your own strength. And I'll say right now, I wouldn't trade those 3 losses for anything, because I learned so much. And the greater benefit for me is this: no one can ever say that, again, I just came in right after my father. And again, those who have, it's not a knock on them. I applaud it, because oftentimes you carry with you those same allies that your father or mother may have had, and you're able to build on that legacy. But that was not the path the Lord had for me. And so for me, these 3 losses taught me a lot and allowed me to keep sharpening my skills and hone them to the level where I think I'm a better leader because of it.
Exactly. And I remember Obama, when he talked about how he got his behind handed to him in Chicago with his first congressional run. And he had to learn, some things. So losses aren't always a loss if you gain the knowledge. And you definitely gain that knowledge. So we're going to go to a commercial break right now. And when we come back, we're going to continue our interview with State Representative from the state of Tennessee, District 58, the Reverend Dr. Harold Moses Love, Jr., pastor of Lead Chapel AME Church, Nashville, Tennessee.
It's time for another new Kansas City Spotlight. Here's your host, Lauren Scott.
St. Paul's School of Theology is open for new students, and they want you to enroll. I'm Lauren Scott, your host for Kansas City Spotlight, and today I'm joined by Shannon Hancock, Executive Director of Admissions and Communications, to learn all about it. Good morning, Shannon. How's it going?
Good morning. It is going well. Thank you for having us.
Of course. So tell me, I'm interested, what exactly is seminary, and who can attend?
Seminary, simply put, is a place where we learn, we engage theological conversations. If you are willing to engage tough conversations about faith, church, and society, you are absolutely welcome to attend.
I love that. Okay, so what kind of degrees do you offer? And are there also options for online classes?
Absolutely. St. Paul offers what we call our flexible learning course delivery. And in that, we take online, hybrid, and on-campus courses. So in our Doctor of Ministry program, our Master of Divinity, our Master of Arts in Christian Ministry, and our Master of Theological Studies are all open for those course delivery options.
Okay, that's really cool. So I know a question a lot of people might have is, can you attend seminary if you don't want to necessarily pursue a degree in it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have tons of community members who come, and they can take it in 2 ways: as a non-degree seeking student, which means you don't have to commit to a degree and you're not on a timeline, but you can also audit a course, a little cheaper, to just test the waters to see if you're interested in learning more about theological studies.
What exactly does the admission process, what does that look like for people?
We say this: everything starts on our website, spst.edu.
Okay.
You'll see apply button at the top. You click the button and it literally walks you through every step. There's a couple of documents that you'll have to have: your transcripts from previous colleges. You'll also have to have letters of recommendation, as well as just a brief statement that tells us why you are choosing to come to St. Paul.
Okay, now I know something else people are really interested in: scholarships.
Yeah.
Do you guys offer scholarships for this?
Absolutely. St. Paul did a thing a couple of years ago and decided that seminary was just getting a little expensive. And we wanted to make sure that students came away with as little debt as possible. And so we, in essence, give every degree-seeking student a 50% tuition discount. And that allows students to find other scholarships, but that really reduces the cost and allows them to come away with as little debt as possible.
Fantastic. All right, so if people want to learn more about this and get in touch with you guys, how can they do that?
Our website, spst.edu, is the perfect place to start. And if you really, really want to get a hold of me, just ask for Shannon and we'll get you going on the process.
Love it. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you.
This Kansas City Spotlight has been paid for by St. Paul School of Theology. For more information, visit spst.edu.
All right, and we're back. And we thank you, St. Paul's School of Theology, for that wonderful spotlight and for your continued patron, the Christian Recorder. So, Reverend Dr. Representative Love, I'm going to just keep flipping all these titles because you have, and I just enjoy it because you have all of them. We're going to dig into a little bit more about your political career and just your thoughts. And of course, the Tennessee Legislature has been in the news quite a bit this year for a variety of reasons. So I came across this book. It was written by Siku Franklin and Ray Block Jr., and it's called Losing Power. Mm-hmm. And it is African Americans and racial polarization in Tennessee politics. Now, it goes up until right around when the Tennessee State Legislature flipped from being Democrat to that time when we had Kent Williams as the Carter County Republican and the Democrats had one seat, and now we have a Republican supermajority. But it's interesting seeing their take on the polarization in the legislature. But I wanted us to kick off with this segment. How have you seen the partisan environment shift in the Tennessee State Legislature? Because I remember there was a time when it was unfathomable that you would see a Republican majority, let alone a Republican supermajority. And just, you've been there all these years, from the times where you were going there with your father up until now where you sit as a leader of the Democratic Caucus. So how have you seen this? What are your thoughts?
Great question. When I came in 2012 into elected office, to your point, that was 2 cycles right after the chamber had flipped to a Republican-controlled majority. 2008, I think about 1 vote, and then 1 seat rather, and then of course 2010 it increased. The opportunity to draw the lines in 2010, afterwards rather, I think really gave members of the Republican Party a chance to shape the state in a way that they would want to shape it for election purposes. To that end, though, I will say this: when I was elected, the partisan nature was still not that high. What you did have was this: you had members of the Republican Party who I think had certain beliefs and opinions about how they had been treated under Democratic majority, and to some degree felt as though they needed to exact some measure of payback. And by that I mean, bills that might not otherwise get killed in a committee might just get killed just because. And I say this because when some things happen, I would see members in the hallways and ask them why things happened that way. And they would say, well, we were done that way when Democrats were in control. And so I said, well, let's try not to repeat that then. If you didn't like it, surely we won't like it. And it's a new crop of Democrats coming in. To that point, though, I will say this: we were still able to get along and get some things done. I do think that one of the reasons that we did see a greater polarization in a partisan nature was because of the election of President Barack Obama and the image that it conveyed to some parts of this country with regard to how people should lead and what their racial and ethnic makeup should be as leaders. And that's not taking a jab at anybody, but simply saying that we had people who questioned his birth status. We had people who questioned his commitment to the country, right? And these things being said caused a deeper divide, because in Tennessee, what you had was in some former counties where Democrats had elected Caucasian members, when African American members ran, they couldn't get those same votes, right? And so we had to question, well, what happened here? Why was this then happened this way? To that end, I will say this also, there became a deeper divide because what you then had was African Americans being able to assert themselves in Democratic caucuses and be elected in leadership. This wasn't just in Tennessee, but was in all parts of the South, in Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, North Carolina, other places. So you saw that kind of polarization happening where majority leaders and minority leaders may have been Black because they were able to maintain their seats. Now, I will say this, we still had good relationships. We had people who would pass some good legislation without concern about who was carrying the bill. A deeper divide came with the election of President Donald Trump. And that, I think, was ushered in by a lot of this refusal to have conversations about the role that African Americans should play in leadership and the role that African Americans should play in conversations about things like removing Confederate statues, removing Confederate busts. And the reason I say the role that African Americans should play, because there were persons who wanted to make some changes, but never really talked to African Americans about those changes. Right? We had people who were trying to bring bills to right some wrongs, but never had conversations with us. There was even a bill one time where I remember in Tennessee was trying to abolish the 14th Amendment. And we were like, well, what's going on here? What are you trying to do? And the justification was that it was never really meant to help us, but to hurt us, and he was going to fix it. So you had those kind of conversations going on. Now, I will say this, in Tennessee, again, we saw the divide become even greater. I saw it because you had a push for Black Lives Mattering. You had a push for racial equity and racial justice that was then met by a pushback by some of my colleagues. I never shall forget, we had a member who wanted to make a particular item a state item. Like we have the state bird and the state tree and the state flower. Well, this gentleman wanted to make this item, I think it was the state gun, right? And so we asked the question, well, why do you want to make this particular gun the state gun? His response was, well, this is where the first white child was born in Tennessee. And I thought was, this is where we're at now, where you're making these statements on the House floor, on the microphone. So I think the greater divide began to grow because you had extremists in the party that kept pushing their party to the right further and further and further. And again, you had instances where the Trump administration began to say things and do things that created an even more difficult position to have conversations about racial justice and racial equity and racial fairness. And I think that's what has caused some of what we have going on now in Tennessee.
And just to see how polarized it's been, because, I remember I did Tennessee Youth Ledge when I was a kid. And I remember going into the State House and walking right past that, I forgot how many ton bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest, right into the state capitol. And but even still having the founder of the Ku Klux Klan right on my left as I walked in, but even still being able to get along with people from East Tennessee, from conservative people, just trying to find common ground. Sure. And now it just seems things have just become a way, like some of these bills that we see pop out, and like ALEC, the ALEC driven bills that basically people take, carbon copy paste, which and by ALEC, I forgot the name of the acronym, but ALEC,
American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yeah, those bills, which I'm sure you see reams of them coming through, carbon copied. Yeah, and just trying to push things to the right.
So to that end, here's what would happen. We would see a bill come up, and one of the benefits of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, of which I'm so very excited to be president-elect of. One thing we've noticed is that at our conferences in the fall, we would have conversations about bills that we knew had been filed in the month prior or even proposed early in the year. And a colleague of ours would say, they ran that bill in Alabama, or they ran that bill in Florida, they ran that bill in Texas. And then we would get a copy of it and look at it. Your point, you'd be like, this is a carbon copy. So what we found ourselves doing when we got back in session was asking questions of the sponsor. The sponsor, what made you bring this bill? Right? Because we wanted to have the answer given. What does this bill do? Right? And what problem does it seek to solve? And many times we would find that they were unable to answer because, to your point, they're reading a script. And the difficulty in a supermajority is that if you can't peel off enough votes to keep the conversation going, then debate is ended and the bill passes.
Yeah. And for those of us who, can you explain what a supermajority is, by the way?
Right. So a supermajority, so in a regular majority, you may have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more votes than the other party. In a supermajority, it really talks about the difficulty for you to continue debate. And even those who have been in a church meeting and heard some semblance of Robert's rules where a motion is made and then discussion occurs and then somebody may say, I move previous question, right? And so the chairperson or chairman or chairlady or chairperson, will ask, well, is there an objection to the previous question? Seeing none, well, someone will not have an objection, right? And if you have enough votes, you can defeat the call for previous question. Well, the problem with that is that previous question, it can pass by 2/3 of the vote. And when you have 2/3 of the members in one party, then you have, let me say again, we have 2/3 of the membership of the House or Senate, a member of one particular political party. They have the ability to vote along party lines and end debate. So if I'm asking questions of, a member of the House of Representatives, and I'm really displaying that they may not know all the details of the bill, and or I'm showing the poor application of this bill and how it would be a detriment to people in Tennessee, the worst thing that can happen to me is that once I'm through asking my questions and I want a colleague of mine to then ask a question, but the next person in the list to talk says, Mr. Chairman on the committee or Mr. Speaker, I move previous question. Well, now we got to vote. The speaker will say, is there objection? We say, yes. We raise our hands. Then it's put to a vote. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye. All those opposed, vote no. And inevitably, in a supermajority situation, you will have votes along party lines, and folks will vote to have previous question prevail, and now you're voting on the bill. And we've had an instance where a previous question was called without even discussion about the bill.
Wow. And, it's been heartbreaking to see that. And one thing that was particularly heartbreaking was in April when we saw a supermajority vote to expel representatives from the House. So we saw pictures of you at ground zero. So tell us about your perspective on the events in April when your colleagues were called to the well and expelled from the Tennessee House of Representatives.
So for those who may not know, again, my leadership role in the House is that I am the assistant Democratic leader. What that means is there are 2 sides of leadership. There's the caucus side, then there's the leadership side, or the caucus side and the policy side. On the policy side, you have the Democratic leader, Democratic assistant leader, Democratic whip, Democratic floor leader, and Democratic, assistant whip. And so these persons have various roles. My role is that if the leader is not in place, then I'm leading our actions on the House floor. On this particular, now also my job is to make sure our members are listed in the particular order to speak on bills, or also to be on the lookout to see if a member's bill may be in trouble and we need some assistance in getting it passed. So it's really about policy and the rules and procedures. On this particular day, to your point, after the Covenant shooting, we had members who wanted to really emphasize that we need to work on some gun legislation today, or at least have a conversation about it. When they went to the well, which is where bills are presented, and they began to raise the issue and concern about it, the speaker then ruled them out of order, then called myself and leader Karen Camper up to the dais where he was to talk about what was going on. What members didn't see was that when we got pulled outside to the balcony to discuss next steps, they were trying to expel our members that day. Of course, we pushed against it and insisted that they be at least given a chance to not be expelled today, and that we just go ahead and conduct business as usual. We went and had a conversation with the members. I said, listen, they're trying to expel you all, but we pushed back against it. We're going to try to, move that doesn't happen. 2 or 3 days later, as you know, they did bring up articles of expulsion. And at that point, we're then having to confront this and get to our members a general understanding of how this is going to be. It basically was a trial where they're asked questions, they're allowed to answer, but then a vote is taken, because the proposal is this: someone brings a resolution that you should be expelled. You have a right to defend yourself in those accusations. Then a vote was taken. And so my role, to your point on ground zero, was to help keep our members, level-headed in our responses to the expulsion hearings. Yes, it was emotional. Yes, it was very painful, but we still have to make sure that we are, doing it in a manner where our members can respond effectively and present their case for why they should not be expelled. We can't just go up in there and not be prepared for that. And so that was part of the task. The second task was, once they were expelled, to have conversation about what does the appointment process look like if they want to be reappointed, and if the Shelby County and Davidson County Metro Councils and City Councils will appoint them, or commissions will appoint them, what that looks like, and how can we get them back in place as soon as we can.
Wow. And we saw that the expulsion literally took place, and to your credit, the Shelby County Council and the Davidson County Metro Council unanimously voted to send them back. Sure. And then they won their elections again. But just to see, and then just the naked racist issues, because there were 3 of them.
Sure.
But the 2 black men were expelled and the 1 white woman wasn't.
And we told our colleagues when the first vote came down, I remember having a conversation with colleagues saying, listen, y'all don't want to do this. The optics will be horrible. You've expelled an African-American male. You've retained a Caucasian female. And now you're about to expel an African-American male? Don't do this, right? You should have done the first one, but don't do this. And they insisted on doing what they did.
And just to think that less than 2 weeks later, the speaker had to expel, a Republican had to resign for messing with an intern.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, you think about at that moment, I saw what could have been a potential bad situation, that they were going to be forced to either expel him or live with what he had been accused of doing. And of course, literally, Dr. Thomas, we had broken for lunch. I saw him out eating, and he told me what had happened. And when we come back, literally, he's resigned. He didn't even come back from lunch.
Yeah, because he knew y'all would be on him like white on rice.
Because there's going to be a question of equity and fairness to say, okay, you have expelled these 2 African-American legislators for breaking decorum. Why has this man not been expelled for what he has done?
Yeah. So you mentioned your work with the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. And we started off by saying that we know that there are at least 24 AMEs in state legislatures around the country in the United States. So tell us about this role with the National Black Caucus of State Legislators that you're going to assume.
So the first meeting of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators occurred in Nashville in 1977. It was birthed out of a desire for African American legislators to have a meeting where they could increase their knowledge base, where they could be better equipped to serve their constituencies. And it also was birthed out of the fact that for many of our legislators, they were still fighting for personhood in their elected office. And by that, I mean this. My father, when he was elected in 1968, documented that their Black Caucus was birthed out of the fact that white Democrats and white Republicans would not speak to them. They would not have conversations with them. And so out of that feeling of not being wanted and feeling of being intimidated by your colleagues, they birthed this organization that gave value and worth to them, that allowed them to be able to know that they could carry on and be successful in their work. And so here we are, 47 meetings later, and we're back in Nashville. The role of president-elect is to serve if the president is unable to serve, but more than that, to be prepared to be president in 2 years. And so this is my first year as president-elect. Completing that, I'll do one more year, then automatically be president. And that has given me a chance to help shape, I think, the direction that the organization will go in, because we deal with more policy than people think. A lot of stuff flows down from the federal level to the state level. And it's nearly impossible to really quantify all of the work that we end up doing, because again, stuff flowing down to the state level, from issues with books that are going to be banned, issues with affirmative action, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. All these things come down to us. And so that you need African Americans in these places of policymaking to help make sure that it's not just a cultural competency piece, but it's really diving deep into making sure that our communities are taken care of.
It's interesting because I was in the 5th Episcopal District speaking with, I was at dinner with Bishop and Supervisor Few, and both of them are from Tennessee. And we were talking with them and the elders, and Supervisor Few asked, well, what are some things, we were having a political conversation. She said, well, what are some things that you would recommend regarding, like, if you were in the Democratic, giving advice to the Democratic Party, what are some things you would say? And I said they need to pay attention to the states, because we have let the state legislatures get ridiculously out of whack.
Yeah.
And people don't understand how important those state legislatures are when it comes to policy.
Sure. Yeah, because you think about also in our cities and counties, in most states, I dare say all, cities and counties are created by, or were created by, the state legislature or by the state government. They are a branch to a degree of it. And that's why when you see these state preemptions and overreaches, it's because of the created nature of cities and counties that you have states saying, we're going to pull back some of the power and authority we gave you, taxing and issues with education. So you're right. People haven't paid attention, which is why we even talk about redrawing of district lines and gerrymandering. The non-response to the census allowed persons to go in and capture state houses and then reshape congressional districts also.
Yeah, Tennessee, it grieved me to see, since 1870, Republican hasn't represented any part of Nashville until now, because the state legislature did the unthinkable and carved up Nashville into 3 congressional districts, which was whatever you do, don't do that. There was a time when they were fine with having Nashville, Memphis, and the other seats, but they even went after that, which just it's like this. It boggles the mind to think in such a short time all these things are happening. These assaults, not just on, and these is going beyond partisan assaults. These are assaults on democracy.
Sure. Yeah, it's difficult, very difficult.
Yeah.
And again, state levels, it's nearly impossible to, again, talk about the level at which rights and other things have been run over. You look at issues around abortion, issue around, again, access to health care, issues around education. It's at the state level.
Hmm. Hmm. And we're seeing that. I mean, in South Carolina, where I'm right now, the state legislature, over the stringent objections of every single female senator, Republican and Democrat, voted to put in an abortion ban because they knew that if they had let it be voted on like it was voted on in Ohio, it would not have passed.
Right.
And it's just it is mind-boggling. Well, there's so much more we can ask about, and I also want to flag your work on equity for Tennessee State University. So can you just really quickly tell us what you have done to spotlight the inequity that hit our one state HBCU?
Yeah, so you're talking about land grant funding, and this is an issue affecting 19 other HBCUs, or 19 HBCUs rather, Tennessee State being one of them. And the basic explanation is this. These schools are supposed to be funded in an equitable and just fashion. And since 1890, when they were created, they have not been funded that way. They've been underfunded and undersourced and under-resourced. As a result, many of them have had to have deferred maintenance on buildings, have lower scholarship amounts, have lower endowment amounts, have lower pay levels for faculty and staff. And we did research here in Tennessee that led us to discover that $544 million worth of funding has not been sent to Tennessee State from 1957 to 2020. The Biden administration also looked at funding from 1987 to 2020 and discovered that in another tranche of money, another section of money, the basic campus funding, right, the direct appropriations were underfunded. And I want to explain to folks like this. So you have more students at your non-HBCU land grants, but the question became, what about the per pupil funding? When you divide the number of students into the total amount of funding, is it more than the funding at the HBCU land grant? What we found was, for Tennessee State, for example, it was a amount of $2 billion from 1987 to 2020 difference in funding. So the University of Tennessee, Knoxville got $2 billion more per pupil, right? So collective per pupil amount. And we tell folks, yes, UT Knoxville maybe should get more money because they have more programs. Maybe they should get more money because they have more buildings to keep up. But the per pupil amount should not be such a huge gap. And so we're working now with governors across the country, with our own state legislators, to find ways to get this situation taken care of. The state of Maryland, a few years back, had a lawsuit brought about the four HBCUs there having duplication of programs and being underfunded. And they were able to recoup $577 million. Again, as we talked about in Tennessee, we identified $544 million, but we were able to recoup $300 million of that. And those two amounts are completely separate from this amount that the Biden administration has identified.
I mean, it's just to think, we talk about capacity, we talk about HBCUs, but the fact that we now have the smoking gun. I remember the photo of you in the Chronicle of Higher Education with the notebook that your dad had written, because your father had documented this.
In 1970.
So it's not, so it's not that they didn't know. And to say we now have proof that you have underfunded. So all these things we talk about, the dorms are this and the programs are that, the administration's this, it's because they didn't get the same money, literally. And it's
and I say this to what you're doing now adds to this, because media, technology has amplified the message. To your point, my father in 1970 produced a report, but even access to Black newspapers then was not going to amplify what they discovered. But now when you have social media, when you have other forms of media, when you have radio, when you have programs like what we're on right now, the Christian Recorder, is going to amplify that because people need to know the facts about this underfunding.
Yeah. Well, we are drawing. This has been a rich conversation. We could spend so much more time here talking about stuff, and I know our audience would want to hear from you because you sit at some unique crossroads. But I want to pose one final question to you before we go. So we are moving towards next year, which is an election year. You sit uniquely as a pastor, but also in the halls of public office. So what are some thoughts, tips you can give our audience regarding political engagement, particularly leading up to this 2024 election?
I'm going to borrow from some of what was said at the WMS quadrennial by one of our presenters who I believe is a state attorney in Florida. One thing we have to do is move beyond the emotional disconnect of not voting for a candidate because they don't hit 10 out of 10 things we want to have done. There are going to be candidates that are going to be on the ballot that may not hit all 10 of our issues the right way. Now, on the other side is a candidate who doesn't hit any of our issues. And we can't afford to stay home because candidate A only hit 7 out of my 10. We know for sure that candidate B doesn't hit any. Because what we find is when you stay home, that is a vote for that other candidate. When you don't engage the process, that's a vote for the candidate. So I would say to people, make a plan for voting, get as much information as you can about the candidates, and find ways to engage your own faith institution. In this case, find ways to engage your own AME Church in the process of hosting forums or being present when a forum is hosted, when the pastor or the lay organization, the WMS or the YPD or the Sons of Allen or the Richard Allen Young Adult Council, when any of our ministries or when the bishop or when the supervisors engage or when the elders talking about engaging the process, show up, attend the meeting, and be engaged and be ready to mobilize the people to vote.
So voting plans are important. And also when the election's over, how do you keep it up? Because we're good at turning out, but great what do you do the next day?
So we have to stop looking at the election day as a moment in time and then walking away and never revisiting that moment in time until 4 years later. Election day is part of a stream of events that start with making sure you're registered to vote, that then follows up with getting information about who is going to be on the ballot, which then maybe it's an initiative and not a person on the ballot, right? And then making that plan to go and then vote. And then once the election, to your point, has happened, then follow back up to engage that legislator or whoever you've elected to find out what things they're going to be doing to do what they promised in the campaign, right? Which means you may have to go by and visit their office. You may have to send an email. You may have to make a phone call. You may have to show up at the city council, at the county commission, or at the state level meeting, the committee meeting. You may have to, contact your member of Congress. Those are follow-up questions that you must ask them so you engage in the year-round stream. And now, as an engaged voter, election day is just one activity in that stream of the electoral process, because we're talking about policy making. So policy is then formulated, but then it needs to be evaluated to see if it needs to be modified. And oftentimes modification occurs a year or two later after the election.
And I'm glad to see that you're using that. You briefly gave us part of your PhD in public administration research. See, I'm glad. I was going to slide that in there too. Well, Representative Reverend Dr. Harold Moses Love Jr., we are delighted to have had you here with us.
Yes.
And I'm glad that thank you for wearing the blue tie for me, even though I know your colors are purple and gold. I appreciate you wore blue today. But we thank you for being here. And I know that this interview will bless persons that watch it. And I'm hoping that And I will be using what you just said, that continuum policy. I have to give a presentation on policy and advocacy here in South Carolina. And I definitely will be talking about understanding that elections are snapshots and not the end all be all. So thank you for reminding us of that as someone who sits in an office and knows that your constituents, you listen to the one who's coming in there almost every day versus, So any final remarks before we go, Representative?
No, just grateful to you and all that you do. Grateful for the AME Church. Grateful that the Lord has blessed me. I always, when I'm praying and thanking the Lord for what He's blessed me with, it is the church that is up there at the top, because it has afforded me an opportunity to, as I say, to live out the promises I've made to the Lord, and also to live out the promises He's made to me. And so I'm grateful for the AME Church. Grateful for your friendship over these many years, and grateful for the next generation of leaders that will come out and keep our policy making and our pulpits engaged.
Amen. And on that note, we will see you all next time.